All right, so this is from my book. And what we see here is a copy of the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder, which was found in 1921 in Baghdad. It's in the British Museum. It contains the words of the first Neo-Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. And Nebuchadnezzar is named, Nebuchadnezzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So we get a lot of the story of what's going on in that entire time period from that cylinder. Okay. So Isaiah, who was the first major prophet in the Bible, Isaiah, son of Amos, was not a prophet of the Babylonian exile, but lived more than 100 years prior to the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But he issues a prophecy condemning a king of Babylon. And at some point, I'm going to do an entire video on those chapters from Isaiah because it's fascinating. But there's a king who resembles Nebuchadnezzar. It might be just the Babylonian dynasty or the kings of Babylon, but most likely it's Nebuchadnezzar himself. Okay? So this is what the prophecy says. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? So the king here is of Babylon here is a man who destroyed cities and took captives from the nations. So I think it's most fitting that we say that that is Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Also, we have Jeremiah, who also predicted the coming of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Jeremiah lived in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and he predicted the manner and time of Judah's captivity. This is the actual words of Jeremiah. Okay, so the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord when King Zedekiah sent him to Pashhur, the son of Melchiah, and Zephaniah, the son of Messiah, the priest, saying, please inquire for the Lord of us, for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, makes war against us. Perhaps the Lord will deal with us according to all his wonderful works, that the king may go away from us. And then further down in another verse, I think it's verse 14 or 7, something like that. And afterwards says the Lord, I will deliver Zedekiah, king of Judah, his servants, and the people, and such as left in the city from the pestilence and sword and famine, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into the hand of their enemies, into the hand of those who seek their life. And he shall strike them with the edge of the sword. He shall not spare them or have pity or mercy. So this is Jeremiah prophesying several years before the actual captivity of the Jews. So Nebuchadnezzar marches on Judea and sacks the city of Jerusalem. All right, so who was Nebuchadnezzar? Well, Nebuchadnezzar was the son of Nabopolassar, who lived from 658 BC to 605 BC until he was struck down by a sickness. Nabopolassar was in his own words. This is in the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder, which I showed you earlier, just now. I'll just show you these cylinders so you can see where I'm getting this information from. This is the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder, and there's other documents. This is the Nabonidus Chronicle, which is the grandson, no, excuse me, the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar. So the Nabonidus Chronicle is a series of ancient Babylonian clay tablets and cylinders. The cuneiform tablet above is now on display at the British Museum as well. Okay, so this is all in cuneiform, and if you can read cuneiform, it would be a fascinating night, I think. So this comes from these cylinders. So in his own words, he calls himself the son of a nobody. And he launched the 11th and last dynasty of Babylon, which is known as the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Kind of like the Babylonian Empire rose to new heights. And prior to this time, Babylonian had existed for centuries as a vassal kingdom to Assyria. If there was a Babylonian empire, then they were conquered by Assyria. And Nineveh was the political and cultural capital of Babylon, or of Assyria, excuse me. So you have Jonah being sent to Nineveh. You have another prophet, Zephaniah, I believe, who was, um, let's see if was it Zephaniah? Let me check this out real quick. I said this in the last video. I don't want to say this wrong. Nahum, excuse me. Nahum prophesies Nineveh's destruction. So Jonah preaches against Nineveh, and then later Nahum prophesied against Nineveh as well. Okay. So Nineveh was the political and cultural capital. So if you know the story of Jonah, excuse me, Jonah, Jonah was sent to Nineveh to prophesy against. After he was swallowed by a great fish, he comes to Nineveh, and he is that's the story of Jonah. So that's the political and cultural capital of Assyria. But Babylon, with its mystics and astrologers, was considered the spiritual capital of Assyria. And so there's an easy piece between these two cultures. You have Babylon as a kingdom within the empire of Assyria. In 627 BC, the death of the king Ashurbanipal, I think I'm saying that in the correct Assyrian accent here. No one really, I joke about that. There's a correct way of saying that, but no one really knows how these ancient names were pronounced, probably very differently than the way we say them today. But so there's political instability. And that's the same year the prophet Jeremiah first appears in Judah, Jeremiah 1:2. In 626 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, who at that time was an Assyrian official, seized this opportunity by forging an alliance with the Medes and the Scythians. The Scythians are northern tribes above the Caucasus Mountains and in the steppe lands of Central Asia. So he drove the Assyrians out of power and influence in the region, and a Babylonian dynasty arose. Nebuchadnezzar sealed the alliance with the king of Media, Cyaxares I, through his marriage of his son Nebuchadnezzar to Cyaxares' granddaughter, through his son Astyages, named Amytis, excuse me. The famed Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which Herodotus wrote about, which was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, was built as a wedding present for Amytis, who was said to have been homesick for the mountains of her home country. Okay. Although Nebuchadnezzar is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, he was the king who overthrew the Assyrian Empire by destroying Nineveh in 612 BC, as prophesied by Nahum and Zephaniah. Okay, so it's also Zephaniah. I was correct about that. The destruction earlier prophesied by Jonah was averted by Nineveh's repentance in Jonah 3:1-10. This is the reason why I write books, is because I can't remember all this stuff. If I don't write it down, there's no way I could remember it. So, and then I write it down, I make notes for myself, and someday I have a book. It's interesting how that works out. Although God's wrath was stayed on Jonah's preaching and the repentance of the city, he decreed that Nineveh would be destroyed. His decree that Nineveh would be destroyed finally came to pass through Nebuchadnezzar. In 609 BC, Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt came to the aid of Assyrians against Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar had driven the remaining Assyrian forces all the way to Carchemish, which was on the border of Syria and Asia Minor, directly to the north of Judah. King Josiah of Judah became convinced by the prophets Jeremiah and Habakkuk that Babylon was going to destroy Judah as God's punishment for their sins. Josiah the king was a young king when he first became king, and there was actually a revival in Judah for a time, but eventually they were destroyed by Babylon. So Josiah understood that Nebuchadnezzar, the general and son of Nebuchadnezzar, was God's special instrument of judgment. Therefore, he considered any attack on Babylon to be against God's will. So he intervened when Egypt went to war against Babylon. Both the Egyptians and many of the Jews must have thought Josiah's sudden intervention to stop Egypt from attacking the Babylonians to be foolhardy and ill-advised. Many believed that it would have been Judah's salvation to have Egypt fight and conquer Babylon. But would Egypt have been a better tyrant? You tell me. Anyway, God's will was for Babylon to destroy Judah and Jerusalem. So it's kind of interesting, when we see empires rise and fall. We're in a kind of like an American empire stage right now. Like, what's God's will for our country? Is it to persevere forever, or is there a certain point where It's actually God's will for us to, pass the baton on to the next empire. The king of Egypt wanted to extend his lands northward to Syria. Judah would have come to under subjugation in any case, because it was God's will. Josiah's plan to stop Pharaoh Necho on the plains of Megiddo resulted in his death in battle. So Megiddo, the Battle of Megiddo or Armageddon, became a byword for the military defeat of the nation of Judah. So we have that Armageddon image in Revelation, which is very important. It's covered in 2 Kings and also 2 Chronicles. So just like Waterloo is a synonym for the final defeat, in modern times you have Armageddon or the Battle of Megiddo. That's a synonym for the military defeat of Judah. That's very important for interpreting Revelation, by the way, from a preterist perspective. The people of Jerusalem put Jehoahaz, the younger son of Josiah, on the throne, while Necho marched north and defeated the Babylonian forces at Carchemish. On Necho's return to Jerusalem 3 months later, Jehoahaz surrendered and was taken captive by the Egyptians. The Egyptians put Eliakim, the older brother of Jehoahaz, on the throne as a vassal king, a puppet of Necho, and he changed his name to Jehoiakim. So you have Eliakim, whose name was changed to Jehoiakim. Okay, 605 BC. This is a major battle. Nebuchadnezzar attacked Carchemish again. It's called the Battle of Carchemish. And this time, the combined forces of Assyria and Egypt could not prevent the Neo-Babylonian Empire from conquering the known world. As Nebuchadnezzar marched through Jerusalem on his way to attack Egypt, he convinced Jehoiakim to turn against Egypt and pledge his loyalty to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar died in Babylon about this time, while his son Nebuchadnezzar was engaged in the Battle of Carchemish. So Nebuchadnezzar is this king. He's the son of a nobody. He probably came from a shepherd or some farmer, and he just somehow, through marriage, he becomes this all-powerful king, and then the son becomes the king of the world after the Battle of Carchemish. But during the Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar hears this news. He's about to attack Egypt, and the defeat of Assyria at Carchemish left Nebuchadnezzar the second as the new king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, stretched from Persia all the way to Egypt. So Nebuchadnezzar's importance to the biblical timeline is that he's the father of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's the king who Nebuchadnezzar sacks Jerusalem and brings the Jews into captivity for 70 years. Nebuchadnezzar established the native Chaldeans not only as a successor to the Assyrians, but for a time as the dominant political power in the Near East. That clay cylinder I showed you earlier, let me go back to that. Let me see where that is, right here. This is the clay cylinder. And I was in the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., which is an awesome place to go. They had a replica of this. I was kind of excited that I saw this there, and I said, I had just written this book, and I was excited that I knew all about it, and I could explain to my friend what it was about. So this is a clay cylinder discovered in 1921. It's a lengthy inscription that describes the reign of Nebuchadnezzar in his own words. He describes himself as humble origins, a shepherd who was dedicated to the gods of Babylon as a youth. He was also concerned with building projects and fortifying the walls of Babylon. He then gives this charge to it. He also built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon as a wedding gift to his, where's that? Anyway, what did I say about that? So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon is another building project that took place during this time. So he then gives this charge to his son that would succeed him to follow his example. Nebuchadnezzar, king of justice, the shepherd called by Marduk, the one created by Ninmena, queen of queens, the one to whom Nebu and Tishmedo stretch out their hands, the prince of the beloved Ninshiku. These are gods of Babylon. And I'm not going to read all the way through this because this is going to take minutes and minutes. But just to show you, this is the autobiography or the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar with the instructions to his son after he dies. And so he basically instructs him to be loyal to any king that succeeds him. I'll just sum this up down here. It says, I, in order that absolutely no future king will remove my well-chosen words, in order that no words are made to supersede my speech, I swore Marduk's oath, my lord, and of Shamash, my god. So these are the gods of Babylon. Woe to me if my pronouncements are not true but false. At that time, I found the royal statue of my predecessors who had rebuilt that wall, and in a secure place, the great foundations, together with my statue, I planted it in perpetuity. So this was a big thing. I'm going to, honor the statue of my predecessors, rebuild the kingdom. I'm going to erect my own statue, which will stand for all time. And this is his charge to his son, Nebuchadnezzar. Any king at any time, whether a son or a grandson who will succeed me, whose name Marduk will call to sovereignty over the kingdom, do not be concerned with acts of might and power. Seek the sanctuaries of Nebu and Marduk. Let them slaughter your enemies. The Lord Marduk examines pronouncements and examines the heart. The one who is loyal to Bel, his fountains will endure. So the one who is loyal to the son of Bel will go on forever. When the wall becomes dilapidated and you address it and you address its disrepair, in the same manner as I found the inscription of any king who preceded me and did not alter his preceded me and did not alter its location, find my own inscription and place it alongside your inscription by order of the great Marduk, the great Lord, whose order is not revoked. So it's a commandment to be, establish your honor in perpetuity, honor the gods. So you can understand why, even though Nebuchadnezzar is, Daniel proves to Nebuchadnezzar that the God of Israel is the God of gods. He still has this allegiance to his father and to the kings of Babylon. So that kind of explains the background of that. That's the reason why it was so difficult for him, after he was, shown the God of gods, he erects a statue to himself. He's shown the God of gods, Jesus Christ, in a dream that he's going to smash the statue and establish a kingdom that's going to take over the whole world. And yet, what does he do in the next chapter? He erects a statue to himself, a gold statue. Okay, so the name Nebuchadnezzar is mentioned over 90 times in the Bible and very prominently in Daniel 1 through 5. Nebuchadnezzar is derived from Akkadian Nebu Kuduri Usur, which means, "O God, Nebu, preserve and defend my firstborn son." Interesting. After winning the Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar marches on Jerusalem and captures the city. He put to death the priests and members of the royal family. He captured and sought the loyalty of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah. Since Pharaoh Necho of Egypt had killed Jehoiakim's father and taken his brother prisoner, Jehoiakim agreed to Nebuchadnezzar's proposition. As Nebuchadnezzar marched on with his army to attack Egypt, he received word that his father Nebuchadnezzar had died, leaving him as ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, including all the lands he just conquered. Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon as a victor with spoils of war. On his return, he passed through Jerusalem and took items from the temple of Jerusalem to place in the temple of Babylon. So that's important to the story of Daniel. And you get that from other places in the Bible, Second Chronicles and Jeremiah and so on. He took King Jehoiakim and his son Jeconiah and the nobility of Jerusalem to Babylon with the intention of educating them in Babylonian ways. He hoped to put them in place as vassal kings in Judah. So this is the whole background of Daniel, is that Daniel and the Hebrew children were captives. They were part of the royal family, so they're related to these other people that we just mentioned. So this was not the mass deportation of the Jews that occurred with the destruction of the temple in 586 BC, but this was the earlier group of elite Jews related to the king. This was in 605 BC. So Nebuchadnezzar's plan was to train the next generation of Hebrew governors in the language and literature of the Chaldeans, as mentioned in Daniel 1:4, so that they would be loyal subjects to Babylon. So that's what they did. They didn't just conquer people and smash them, but they absorbed them into the kingdom and tried to teach them to be good vassal subjects. In 604 BC, according to Babylonian records, Nebuchadnezzar returned to Syria and Judah. He reinstated Jehoiakim as a vassal king of Judah. And at that time, Jehoiakim imprisoned the prophet Jeremiah and burned the scroll of the prophecy. Jeremiah had been prophesying since 627 BC in the 13th year of Josiah. He'd been predicting the Babylonians would destroy the people of Judah because they were still following after pagan idols. Jehoiakim, thinking Nebuchadnezzar was the protector of Judah, punished Jeremiah by casting him into the prison. There, the prophet dictated his prophecies, and the scroll became the first 20 chapters of the book of Jeremiah. Then he instructed his scribe Baruch to preach from the scroll in front of the temple of Jerusalem. The scroll was also delivered to Jehoiakim, who threw it into the fire again. And yet Jeremiah rewrites the scroll and continues to prophesy against Jerusalem from prison. Jeremiah is actually, even though I love Daniel, Jeremiah is actually my favorite prophet in the Old Testament because he was so stubborn, and he was just, he writes a scroll, they burn it, writes another one, they burn it again, write it again. It's just, he just won't give up. So in 603, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. The years go down in number, your number 605, 604, 603. He has this dream of a statue made of gold and silver, brass, and iron. The kingdom of Babylon is depicted as the head of gold, which was extend from 605 to 539. Then the Medo-Persian Empire, led by King Cyrus, were the arms of silver, the arms and chests of silver that would rule from 539 to 330 BC. And then Macedonia, Greece, led by Alexander the Great, symbolized as thighs of brass, would dominate the world from 330 to 64 BC. And then finally, the Roman Empire, symbolized by legs of iron with 10 toes of iron mixed with clay, would last from 64 BC to AD 70. Now, these are the times when the empires dominated Judah, not the entire length of the empires, but during the time when they had dominion over God's people. Okay, the 10th king of Rome, Vespasian, would destroy the temple, according to later prophecies of Daniel. Finally, in Daniel chapter 2, there's a stone hewn out of a mountain thrown at the feet of the statue, which disintegrated and vanished. The little stone gradually became a hill, then a mountain. It doesn't say a hill, but it grows into a mountain. And then finally it became so big that it dominated the whole world. So the stone in Daniel 2 symbolized the kingdom of God, which would begin in the days of these kings, according to Daniel 2:44. That's why I call my book In the Days of These Kings. So that's in the days of the Roman kings, the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. So the smashing of the idolatrous statue by the stone cut without hands symbolizes the futility of idolatrous world empires that exalt themselves against Christ's kingdom. In 602 BC, Nebuchadnezzar misinterprets the dream and builds a large statue of gold. Perhaps the statue was of the king himself. Then he throws the 3 Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, into the fire, which we talked about in the last video, for refusing to bow down and worship the statue. They were saved by the 4th man in the fire, like the Son of God. Daniel 3:25. So many consider this to be a Christophany, an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. In 601 BC, Nebuchadnezzar returned to Egypt to finish the war which he had started with Pharaoh Necho, or Necho. I say Necho, you say Necho. In 605 BC, which had been interrupted by the death of his father Nebuchadnezzar. Necho had been preparing for the invasion for 4 years and was able to temporarily stave off the Babylonian forces. In 599 BC, Jehoiakim, perhaps thinking Egypt had defeated Nebuchadnezzar, rebelled against Babylonian rule after having served as a vassal king for 3 years. This is all going on during, between chapters 3 and 4 of Daniel, and we know about it from other prophecies, from Chronicles, from 2nd Kings, 2nd Chronicles, from Jeremiah, and so on. So you can piece it all together. That's what I have done here. And then in 598, Jehoiakim was killed as raiding bands of Chaldeans, Syrians, Moabites, and Ammonites. I shall also mention the Scythians, which is another part of my theory on biblical prophecy, but we'll get to that later. So all these hordes, they come against Judah. And so Egypt does not respond with help. Then his son Jehoiakim became king for only 3 months. So there's Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim, which is a little bit confusing, but it took me a long time to get that straight. He becomes king for only 3 months until Nebuchadnezzar comes back to Jerusalem with a large force to lay siege to the city. In February and March of 597, this is the second captivity. First captivity was in 605, second captivity is in 597 when Nebuchadnezzar seizes Jerusalem, captures King Jehoiakim, which is in Jeremiah and 2 Kings. And he appoints Jehoiakim's uncle Mattaniah to be king of Judah, and he changes his name to Zedekiah. So you can read all about this in Jeremiah and in 2 Kings. An inscription on a clay tablet called the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle or the Jerusalem Chronicle describes the war on Egypt and Damascus at the siege of Jerusalem. And this is what the clay tablet says. In the 7th year of the month of Kislevu, king of Akkad, who is Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, mustered his troops. So Akkad is another name for the ancient kingdom, which is Babylon. So back in before the first Babylonian Empire, it was called Akkad. But so he mustered his troops, marched to Hadiland, and besieged the city of Judah. And on the 2nd day of the month of Adar, he seized the city and captured the king. He appointed there a king of his own choice, received its own heavy tribute, and sent to Babylon. So what's awesome about this is we get exact months and years, and you can line that up with biblical prophecy. So that gives us a very accurate. The Babylonians kept excellent calendars because they were astronomers, okay, and astrologists as well. Among his group of captives was the prophet Ezekiel, and he was taken to the river of Kabar in Ezekiel 1:1-3. This is thought to be near Nippur in modern-day Iraq, which is situated to the southeast of the city of Babylon. Sometime after 597 BC, the prophet Jeremiah prophesied that the Babylonians, Ammonites, and Moabites would be judged of God for their warfare against Judea. He also wrote the letter to the exiles, in which he gave the 70 years prophecy, encouraging the Jews to live prosperously in Babylon, but they would not be released in their lifetime. But Jeremiah also promised the restoration of Jerusalem. So remember that when your nation goes into judgment, you're to be faithful to God and to keep the faith for a new generation that might rise up and restore your godly culture. Around 593, the prophet Ezekiel began to speak the word of the Lord to the Jewish exiles. He encouraged them to remain faithful, stressing that the rule of God extends all over the world. In 588, Zedekiah rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. As a result, the Babylonian army besieged Jerusalem for 2 years. In this summer of 586, Jerusalem fell. Now, this is the third captivity, and this is where we date the captivity from. This is when the temple was destroyed in 586. The entire city was destroyed. The temple furnishings were taken to Babylon. Zedekiah's sons were killed. Nebuchadnezzar brought him in bronze fetters to Babylon with the remaining captives. And a lot of this also is prophesied in Jeremiah as well. Actually, it's not just prophesied, but it's at the very end of Jeremiah, it speaks of the fulfillment of the prophecy. There he had his eyes put out, and an official named Gedaliah was made governor of Judah. Despite the warnings of Jeremiah, Gedaliah was soon assassinated by members of the royal family. The entire city had been taken captive, except the poorest people who were left to tend the land. So even though you had, they say the entire nation of Judah was taken captive, but the Bible actually does say that there were poor people that were left there. And you get that from reading the later books, like the post-captivity books, the restoration books. So people living in the land that then kind of intermarried with other people besides the Judeans, besides the Jews. All right, so the prophet Jeremiah was respected by Nebuchadnezzar and was given an option of living in either Babylon or Jerusalem. And Jeremiah elected to stay in Jerusalem, where he composed the rest of his prophecies. These were directed against the surrounding nations, including Babylon. He also composed lamentations, which were the acrostic songs of lament over the destructions of Jerusalem. And so you have 2 sieges of Jerusalem in 597 and 588. And there are also at least 3 groupings of captives taken to Babylon in 605, 697 and, excuse me, 605, 597, and 586. So there's no set date for the beginning of the captivity, but I propose, I say some, but I propose that the 70 years of Jeremiah 29:10, so the scroll that Jeremiah writes in Jerusalem makes its way to Babylon somehow, to Baruch or someone. And Jeremiah is able to read it in his last years. And so he reads about this 70 years of captivity. Okay. So Jeremiah 29:10, this lasted from the time of Daniel's captivity in 605 to Cyrus's decree in 537. That sort of works. It's about a year or two off. But I believe that the era of desolations is an exact 7-year time period. And this lasted from the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple to the restoration of the temple in 516. Because why? Because he uses the word desolations. Okay. I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish the 7 years of desolations of Jerusalem. Daniel 9:12. So the important thing there is that the temple was laid desolate, it was destroyed, and then it was restored. And that took exactly 70 years. It wasn't just the period of captivity, but it was the period of desolations. So that's the 70-year prophecy. And throughout the book of Daniel, desolation describes several times in history when the temple remained desecrated and not purified for worship. And so I'm going to go through that in later videos, obviously. So since the concern of Daniel is the temple, the 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem is from July 15th to 586 to February 13th, 516, which is actually, it's inclusive of 70 years. It's actually 69 years and about 6 months. That's the most likely fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecies. When biblical prophets use the term years, they use, and days even, they use inclusively. Like it's any part of the day, any part of the years would be that. So that's the reason why the other time period works as well. But this one is literally what the Bible says. Okay, so this is Daniel's first kingdom. You have all these different kings: Nebuchadnezzar, 558 to 605, Nebuchadnezzar, evil Merodach, Nebuchadnezzar, Labashi Marduk, Nabonidus, Belshazzar, and Darius the Mede. So you don't get this in Daniel, but there are all these kings. And in my book, I actually have a family tree. So let's look at this. See if we can find this real quick. Now this is my little family tree of Babylon, and also how they were related to the kings of the Medes and the Persians. So you've got Nebuchadnezzar, his son is Nebuchadnezzar, his son is evil Merodach, then we have Nebuchadnezzar and Labashi Marduk. These are all fairly short-lived kings. I mean, 8 years, 2 years, 4 years, 1 year, and then there's no sons left, so his daughter Necritus marries Nabonidus. Okay, and then Nabonidus is the king of Babylon, and Belshazzar is the next king. So we go directly from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar, who's called his son, but he's actually his grandson. I'll explain that later. Okay, and then Belshazzar reigns during the time when the Darius the Mede and Cyrus take over Babylon from the Medes and the Persians. Okay, getting back to our story here. Okay, so this is what's going on here. I've got also some New Testament corroboration to this too. 584 BC is Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the tree, and Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I'm going to get into that next. Okay. Let's see. This is now Daniel chapter 4, and I'm going to stop this here, and I'll cover the kings of Babylon and what happens in Daniel chapter 4 in the next video.